would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and work, the Gundungurra land and people. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I also want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which you, our listeners, are joining us from today. I recognise the deep connection that First Nations people have to this land, their enduring culture, and their commitment to the preservation and care for their country. This land was never ceded, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Hey there, and welcome to Beyond the Surface, the podcast where we explore the stories of people who have survived religious trauma, left high control or cult communities, and are deconstructing their faith. I'm your host, Sam, and each week I'll talk with individuals who have taken the brave step to start shifting their beliefs that might have once controlled and defined their lives. Join us as we dig into their experiences, the challenges they've faced, and the insights they've gained. Whether you're on a similar journey or you're just curious about these powerful stories, you're in the right place. This is Beyond the Surface. Welcome, Jeremy. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Before we kick straight into it, I like to ask for people where in the world you are at the moment.
For sure. I am in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is the Midwest of the United States, about hour and a half north of Chicago.
Okay.
I'm here on traditional Ho-Chunk, Oneida, and but I'm on a lot of traditional land that
Yeah.
none of it has been ceded and is all sovereign land. Um, I'm on the shores of Lake Michigan, which was known as Lake Michigami, and so a lot of different indigenous cultures and heritages here still to this day.
Beautiful. And before I ask what is always my first question, I feel like with all of my US guests at the moment, I'm doing a bit of a, you would know the term welfare check. How on earth are you doing over there?
My passport is up to date just in
Good.
case, and it's we'll get into it, right? But I'm a therapist as well. I work with
Yeah.
religious trauma. That's how we connected. And so I really struggle with like just how far off of reality we are.
Yeah.
It's like a very maddening thing. As somebody who's worked with high needs folks around mental health issues or in mental health crisis who have broken with reality for mental health reasons, living on sort of a daily like why do we have to pretend that why do we have to pretend
Yeah.
this isn't accurate?
Yeah.
So it's maddening, and also, the we're recording
Mm.
earlier than the episode will go up, but the new No Kings rally round two was pretty recent, and that's very uplifting to be able to. It sucks to have to go protest, but it is nice to go out and see lots of like-minded folks who are standing up when
Yeah.
they need to. So.
Oh, from the outside looking in, it is a little bit, it's wild is the only thing that I feel like is what captures it. It's just, other than, I mean, the other term I use is like, it's just a bit batshit crazy and wild. Like, I don't have any other language for it because it just doesn't seem to
Yeah.
comprehend and encapsulate it. So, I can, I have friends in the US, and so like I can only yeah, I mean, from the outside looking in, it's like we can only imagine what it is like to live in that on a day-to-day basis. So it's
Yeah.
tricky.
I sort of keep telling people I'm on team collapse. So, research suggests that societal collapse would improve 99% of people's lives. So I'm
Yep.
just,
Team
let's do that.
collapse. Oh goodness. Okay, so we had a couple of spoilers already, but I like to start this
Sorry.
episode. No, it's fine. I love spoilers. Um, I like to start these episodes with a very broad, vague question, which is where does your story start?
Oh, I mean, there's a couple different places that could start. Wow, that is a good question. I usually start, I guess when we're talking about deconstruction spaces, I usually start at age 10,
Mm.
which is when I informed my parents I didn't want to go to heaven anymore. And they sort of patted me on the head and ignored that. But I think that's really what stands out for me is like when my deconstruction started, even though it took me 20 more years to formally leave the church. It was there from a young age, and I know why I stayed, and I know sort of the control tactics that were used, but I try and I think honor that 10-year-old version of me who caught on a little earlier than the rest of my brain was able to, that like, hey, this isn't for me.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, third grade was a big one for me. I also told my parents I didn't want to go to school anymore, and they ignored that as well.
Unsurprising. Um, I
Yeah.
mean, okay, so there's like two trains of thought that I automatically go with that 10-year-old version of you, which is what sort of space were you growing up in terms of like what flavor of religion were you in? How did your
Yeah.
parents respond to that? And why was that such a big thing for like 10-year-old Jeremy to feel like he needed to say?
Yeah. Yeah. So I was raised in a very small but big to Milwaukee sect that's known as the Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Synod.
Okay.
So very German,
Mouthful.
very Protestant Lutheran.
Mm.
I have a great grandpa who was a pastor and he still did full sermons in German.
Oh,
So
wow.
my family's been in it pretty deeply for a while. Both my parents are Lutheran school teachers. So in this very small and in America, in the United States, I should say, Lutheranism has the ELCA, which is the largest denomination and the most liberal denomination, and then there's the Missouri Synod, which is smaller and more conservative, and then there's the Wisconsin Synod, which is the smallest and the most conservative. So that's
Right.
the one that I was raised in. And yeah, my family was deeply in it. My dad was a principal when I was growing up, and for still to this day, my mom just retired, but both my parents are still in the Lutheran school system. So kind of like a well-known last name in a like big fish in a small pond. People knew who my dad was. People still know who my dad is.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, it's very culty in Milwaukee because there's around 100 Lutheran WELS schools and churches in the Milwaukee area. It's sort of the capital of the WELS is in the Milwaukee area, and one of the suburbs is where the seminary is. So
Okay.
it's sort of the central hub is here in Milwaukee. And so I lived in an urban setting. I grew up in a modern city, but I didn't really interact with anybody who wasn't WELS. And
Right.
so everything I did, school, sports, all that stuff, church obviously was all with WELS people. And so it's a weird sort of double world you grow up in where I was in the north side of Milwaukee, which is predominantly black. I
Mm.
was one of the few white kids in my neighborhood, and because we were poor, obviously, and because my parents worked for a small
Yeah.
religious sect, right? Obviously, we
Yes.
were poor. Um, and so I grew up in Milwaukee, and then like we sort of drove a bit of to find like this Wells school, and they were all over the place. But my parents were so connected, we had to go to the right one, and we had to go to the one that like whatever.
Yeah.
But so it was really culty, and it's weird to sort of say that as a religious trauma therapist now. I work with people who like grew up on compounds and shit. Like
Yeah.
it's not what you see on the Netflix documentaries, but I do think it is what a lot of people who grew up fundamentalist do experience, where you have this really sheltered version of life where you're not able to fully participate in the real world because you're only allowed to interact with the people who are the quote unquote right religion.
Yeah. And we are having a very interesting conversation around that at the moment because one of our states is doing an inquiry into cults and other high control fringe groups. And and there is like a conversation that's going around that this is not just happening in these places that we see on the Netflix docos and
Right.
and in the Prime docos and all of that sort of thing. It is happening in what we would consider like quote unquote mainstream or normal churches and spaces. We
Yeah.
still see the same sort of like cultic, coercive, controlling dynamics. But
Yeah.
from the outside, she looks normal. So, so it's like, I
Yeah.
mean, that's confusing for a kid, I imagine, to grow up in. Like, how did you make sense of that at the time?
Yeah, I mean, as a little kid, I didn't know any different, right? Like
Yeah.
that's all I had. When my dad was a principal, so that was through first grade for me.
Mm.
Um, we lived on the school property. So as a
Yeah.
principal, we got to live in like the school owned a house.
Mm.
And so we got to live in the house that was on the school property. So like as a little kid, I had a full playground in my backyard.
Yeah.
Like could go across the parking lot and there's the basketball courts on the parking lot. And like, so as a little kid, I don't really remember much other than like it's pretty idyllic. I had a playground. I'm the youngest of four. I had older siblings to play with. Like it was
Yeah.
pretty good. I
Yeah.
think what happens, your second question was what happened in third grade, 10-year-old
Mm.
Jeremy. I'm neurodivergent, I have ADHD. I think that's when my brain developed enough to be like, this is boxing me in too
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
Um, but I had a lot of hell trauma. And so as much as I didn't want to go to heaven because singing for all eternity really is what I was not interested in. Um,
It's so funny because last night I did an interview with someone who was like, singing was like my safe space. And so it's so funny
yeah.
where like it's those funny little things that either keep you in or the things that go, I don't want to do that forever.
Yeah. I think what I was
Oh,
told was some version of like, well, you can play baseball in heaven. And that didn't make
yeah.
sense to me, but at least it was like an answer. So it's like, I guess good enough. I don't want to go to hell, so I guess I'll
Oh,
play baseball. Um, but I think both with not wanting to go to heaven and not wanting to go to school is when my ADHD hit, which we know is there's a window of brain development that happens around that age where that's pretty likely.
yeah.
I was a very gifted student, and so I wasn't diagnosed till much later in life. But I think behaviorally and developmentally, I had a lot of extra tasks. I'm old. I'm 37, not that old, but old enough. We had chalkboards, and so I had to like take the chalkboard erasers and clap them out during the day. I took the flag up and down. Like there was stuff that, like extra Jeremy jobs because I was done with my homework. I got good grades. They couldn't say I was in trouble for anything, but
Mm.
also they needed to keep me busy. Otherwise, I'd start like messing with other kids or distracting other people. And so, like when I reflect as a therapist now, I'm like, well, it was so obvious. But this was, the late 90s. Nobody was
Yeah.
doing mental health, especially not in high control religious situations. So, yeah, I think it's when my ADHD hit, and then it's really I didn't have an option to leave. I mean, truly, realistically,
Mm.
until college. I went to a public university, and that was the first time I wasn't in a parochial school, and that was really good for me. And I did what I think a lot of high control people, high control religious survivors do, is I found somebody who grew up in the same religion as I did, and I dated that person. So even when I had like a chance, I think, to leave, that familiarity kicked in of like my roommate's having sex and I am not allowed in my dorm room because there's a sock on the door. That's way outside of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
And so I think like as much as college was really good for me and I grew a lot there, I do think initially there was a lot of like fear, and in that fear dating somebody who was from the same religion as me. So, yeah, it really wasn't until my wife now and I had a kid where I was like, I did the liberal, progressive Christian thing, right? And I worked a lot with the LGBTQ plus community, and I was a safe space, and I
Yeah.
did all of that stuff, moving more and more liberal, moving more and more progressive. But it wasn't until I had a kid where I was like, yeah, there's no way that like teaching Noah's Ark to a child is developmentally appropriate. Like I just can't. And
No.
I think once I sort of said that out loud, it's like, yeah, I don't believe that either.
Yeah.
So again, I sort of view that 10-year-old as that marker of like, I knew I was deconstructing then. There's some other like standout things. I remember having like sit downs with a pastor and stuff, being like, this has to be inaccurate or this cannot be true. Like there
Yeah.
were things that I was really hung up on, but always got enough of an answer, even if it wasn't a good one or it wasn't one that like really got to the root of where I was at. It was again, always just like I needed enough of an answer to stay. I think I was always fighting to stay more than anything else. But also I was like church council vice president and I served on boards and I did things like I think that Christian hand waving that happens of like, oh, you were never really a true believer. It's like, no, I was like actively working hard to get to heaven and to avoid hell. Like that
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
it wasn't that I didn't believe. It was there was a part of my brain that was like, I need this to make sense so that my belief is easier. And it just
Yeah.
really never got easier.
Yeah, and so throughout, I mean, I asked this question particularly for people who were raised in spaces like this, which was at what point was your faith or your spirituality your own and not the one that you were raised in? And who was God to you throughout that time?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have two sort of answers because I think I try and normalize this as much as I can. I think one of the big breaks for me was hitting puberty, where like sexuality was just something I was going to feel guilty about a lot, but
Yeah.
like not stop pursuing it. And
Yep.
so there was, after I hit puberty, and started never having sex, but doing all the things leading up to intercourse. A lot of guilt, a lot of shame about that, but like always sort of the idea that like I wasn't gonna stop. Like it was too good. I liked it too much. It made my brain too happy. And that was something that was like I think that first sort of embodied experience for me where it was like I'm not overthinking stuff. Like I'm just genuinely like enjoying my experience here.
Yep.
And I'm ADHD, I'm autistic, like I'm not out of my head all that often. And
Yeah.
so sex was one of those things where it was like that, but still had the like purity culture and the shame stuff attached to that. So even though I think I knew I was never going to stop pursuing that, whether it was sinful or not, it was still a struggle. But then, yeah, when I left, when I was like, I don't believe this, I
Mm.
had prepped for that without knowing that's what I was doing. Um,
What do you mean prepped for it, even though you didn't know at the time?
so I was a gifted student, as I mentioned earlier. So I graduated from college when I was 20,
Mm.
and which is young here. I don't know. I don't know the Australian timeline for higher education. Um,
Yeah.
but I was a couple of years ahead, and so by the time I did my master's and then my post grad, around the time most people graduate from college, I had two graduate degrees already. And so I think
Okay,
I had,
overachiever.
yeah. I don't say that to brag.
No, I
It's
know.
weird. It's like we refer to it as twice exceptional for people who
Yeah.
are neurodivergent, but on the gifted
Yeah.
side of things. It doesn't necessarily make life easier. It's not an accomplishment because it wasn't hard for me. And again, that's
Yeah.
not a brag. It's just like my brain is wired
The
differently than other
reality.
people's.
Yeah.
But I think I had this professional part of my brain that had been pretty built out by that point of like research says this, science says this. And so I don't know. I don't like the idea that science was my God, but I had this very research based. I went to University of Minnesota, which is one of the top three research institutions in the nation. And so like I had this really good scientific background on what good research looks like, how do you assess data, how do you spot data that's been like fudged and messed with, and like I had this strong scientific background in spite of being raised on Noah's Ark and young Earth creationism and all this other stuff. When I had the opportunity to learn, I like learning, and so I started my career as a Christian counselor and I was convincing people, other believers, like, I know those are the words that are there, but this is how we have to interpret it because this is what the research tells us. And so I was like blending my professional brain, my science mind with like, again, trying to make it fit. I needed it to make sense. And so yeah, by the time I left, I was pretty comfortable being like, science is the thing. I landed in a like atheist pagan space though. I do still find some structure around things like the wheel of the year and marking the passage of time with ritual and some of those. I find that to be an important human experience.
Yeah.
I think some people can get squicked out on the religious terminology of things like ritual and stuff like that, but
Yeah.
that's just human. Religion uses it. It's
Yes.
not a religious idea. But so I was pretty ready for that. And, I find even in pagan spaces, some of the same things that bother me about organized religion, which is
Mm.
humans organize around in-group, out-group dynamics way too much. But yeah, that's been good. That still feels pretty authentic, but like I'm not at a organization at all. There were so few organizations that were helpful, safe landing places for me when I formally left the church, and I think what a lot of people experience is missing that community, and so that community was
Mm.
good. That was also when I came out like publicly as an atheist was around COVID, so there was a lot of like a lot of people were online anyway, and so that
Yeah.
space, I think, being online was really helpful for me. But yeah, sort of a science-based, earth-revering nature is where I land, but without any of the woo. I know that's offensive to some pagans, but that is how I feel about it.
Yeah. I know that when people talk about deconstruction, the conversation is largely around, pulling apart beliefs and doctrines and seeing how it aligns with you and do I believe this, do I believe that, all of
Yeah.
that sort of thing. But was there a part of you, this was all you knew for a really long time, and was there a part of you that was also trying to pull apart what would be referred to as a relationship with God? Or was that not
No, I
there?
mean that was that I never had that. I mean, I don't want to say that. I never
And you
f-
can
I
say
never f-
that.
I never felt it.
Yeah.
And I can reflect on it now as a neurodivergent adult and say like a lot of what I felt like didn't fit in with other people
Yeah.
was being neurodivergent.
Yeah.
But in the context of religion, I thought other people were experiencing some version of like an active relationship or a communion with God. And like
Mm.
I didn't have that. And I just assumed as a child that like that was my fault, right? Like
Yeah.
somehow I was doing it wrong to not experience that. But no, I mean, late as my adulthood came on, there's so many things that I just sort of needed the permission to say out loud that I didn't believe it.
Mm.
You know, like I took a biblical, geez, parochial school, right? I took a biblical archaeology class,
Mm.
and like that wasn't helpful for me. Like that made me question a lot more, and that made me think my teacher was a moron, and like, I hadn't quite put together that like, right, none of this makes sense because it's wrong,
Mm.
but I was like, this person who's supposed to be helping me understand is an idiot because they are making me understand even less. They
Yeah.
must be woefully uninformed. And granted, I felt that about a lot of my teachers for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, there was stuff around. I remember having a pretty big like I'm gonna call it a come to Jesus moment with one of my pastors because I was like, if I choke on the communion wafer and die, and you do an autopsy of me, I do not believe there will be human flesh in my stomach. And like I just like I couldn't because like in my
Yeah.
fundamentalist religion, like it becomes the true, legitimate, literal body and blood of Christ.
Yep.
And I was just like, no, like you're telling me that it's faith and I need to have faith, but like I cannot believe that.
Yeah.
Like we should be able to test it then. And I don't believe that would happen. And I
How
don't
were
think you do either.
how were questions like that responded to? Because I mean, we know in like cultic spaces that questions are
Yeah.
not looked upon fondly, particularly the, wrong kind of questions.
Yeah, I always occupied a weird space for people. One, because I was like sort of a well-known family.
Yeah.
So I think people in power, I wasn't aware of this, but reflecting on it now, I think people in power were like wary of they knew they couldn't excommunicate me, right? Like my family was too big of a
Yeah.
deal. So I
Yeah.
think they were always sort of trying to, but also as this gifted student, so they wanted me in the church. Like there were people who wanted me to be a pastor, which would have been a horrific idea. But like, there were people who wanted to steer me toward some version of like public ministry as a career because I was very smart. I'm
Yeah.
natural, public speaking comes very naturally. There are things that like, again, I know now I was really good at masking and that's all they were appreciating. But like at the time, I think there was this gentleness to their response because of my last name, and
Mm.
then there was a desire that like, hey, if we like push this kid the right way, maybe that's the future generation of the church, which again is was woefully misguided on their parts.
Mm.
Um, but no, I mean it was always sort of it would go on for a while because again that's I'm autistic as well, so like there's that part of my brain that doesn't let stuff go,
Yeah.
and so it'd be like it would turn into like, I don't believe, not only do I not believe this, but I don't believe that you believe this. Because if you believe that,
Yeah.
like, there's, explain to me your belief
Yeah.
because it doesn't make sense to me. And that makes people really uncomfortable. And so I had this again, like neurodivergent way of approaching it that I can reflect on now. But like it made it hard for people. I was earnest, I was genuine. Again, I wasn't coming in like middle finger to the law. I was coming in like, help me understand this because it's bothering me.
Yeah.
And so I got a lot of, I sort of say like the response I got at 10 is what I continued to get, just different versions of it, was just like a pat on the head and like,
Mm.
but you're going to keep doing this. So like, I remember that conversation specifically ended with like the pastor at that time got out like his Greek translation of the like and like I think
Yeah.
he just sort of like I think on some level kudos to him I guess
Yeah.
realized like okay this this person's brain moves really fast. What if I overwhelm them with the intellectual thing? So like we
Yeah.
went to like the Greek roots of the words and stuff like that. I had no frame of reference for a foreign language like that. So I think that was like enough to be like, there is an answer and I don't understand it because I don't speak Greek. And that's again, like it
Yeah.
was like
Right.
a good enough answer to like
Mm.
go on. But like, I my parents are still in the church, right? So
Yeah.
I don't want to like give them more credit for deconstructing than they deserve. But like my mom's an English teacher, and she would sit during church services, and she would take the little, the little pencil or pen that's in the pews for the attendance tracker kind of thing. She would grab that, and she would like circle grammatical errors in the bulletin. And so like I grew up with this like, yes, we had to go to church and we had to be there.
Yeah.
We didn't skip, we didn't take t weeks off. But there was also like this weird sort of like intellectual, like my family, both my parents are teachers, so they really cared about education and they really cared about like intellect. And so it was like, yeah, we're in church and we're supposed to do all the things and look like the nice church family. But also like my mom was like low key shaming whoever printed the bulletin for not like proofreading it. So it was like, so by the time I was like 17, 18, I really wasn't participating in the service. I
Yeah.
was usually like reading the Bible, which my parents would leave me alone then, but I was like, sort of doing my own thing. I really didn't like singing the songs or
Mm.
I would do the things to not disrupt the service for other people, but I was not. And again, I wasn't a non-believer at that point. I was. It was just more of like, I'm going to read this like thing about Paul because that's what my brain's on, rather than like whatever we're getting at Christmas service or Easter service. Like done, been there, done that. That's boring. Let me do something more interesting.
Yeah.
And as long as I wasn't disruptive, my parents pretty much let me be.
Mm.
Um, and I can reflect and say, like, my parents didn't know what to do with me either. I'm aware of that at this point in my life now. But my dad flat out said that to me after I got my master's in psychology. He's like, didn't think this is what you would do with your life, but also, I guess I never knew it was going to happen. Cool. Thanks, Dad. Um, but
Oh.
yeah, I mean, it was weird. I have these like very strong points where it's like, I knew
Mm.
if I could go back and just be like, it's okay to not believe it, you'll be fine. It would have saved
Yeah.
me a lot of time. Um,
And I mean, I
yeah.
think like it sounds a little bit like there was that part of you that was either unable or unwilling to play the mental gymnastics game that so many people play to make shit make sense that doesn't make sense because they're so fucking terrified of the end result, which is hell, right? Like, so
Right.
we do the mental loops and the gymnastics to make things make sense, even though I think so many of us were like, it still doesn't really make sense, but I'm gonna like just really push and just it makes sense, right?
Yeah. Well, you've experienced this on your podcast and probably with some clients too. There's a lot of people who go to seminary
Yeah,
because they're struggling, they have questions, they want to learn more, they want to make it make sense, and that's when they
yeah,
deconstruct. And
yeah,
I think for me, because the sect I grew up in was so small, like the college you went to before seminary that was part of like the Lutheran system was smaller than my high school. So I was like, I don't want to be a pastor or a teacher, but like, fuck no, there's no way I'm going to go to a school that's smaller than my high school. Like, that's awful. Um, and I was good at school, so my parents
yeah,
were pretty hands off on like we were poor, and I was good enough at school where I was going to go to college pretty much anywhere that I wanted for free,
yeah,
just on academics. And so it was like they were pretty hands off and supportive. I think they were just ecstatic that I was like not fighting them on going to college. Um, but so I was like a hard kid to direct because I wasn't doing anything overtly wrong.
mm,
but I wasn't following the script either.
Yeah.
And so I occupied this space of sort of like, I'd get a look or I'd get like a course correction, but I was rarely overtly in trouble. I
Yeah.
was just sort of like, and I learned, I'm the youngest of four, so I sort of learned from my older siblings, like, here's the lane I can occupy and sort of be left alone,
Mm.
which as an undiagnosed neurodivergent kid, a lot of what I wanted was
Hmm.
just to be left alone.
Yep.
And so, yeah, it was that sort of weird space. And I think my experience is a little different because like my parents were really, I have a sister who went to that college and is a teacher till this day. To this day, my parents are still teaching. So like I had this sort of extraordinary status as like a really gifted student
Mm.
where my parents, again, were pretty ecstatic that I stopped fighting them about going to school, um, and pretty much let me do my thing as long as I like maintained my grade point average.
Yeah.
And that wasn't, that seems like a reasonable request. Like there are times where I was an angsty teenager about it, and like I'm a top 10 student. Why are you hassling me about my grades? But like the trade-off was always they'd leave me alone then. I
Yeah.
got to drive myself to school instead of having to ride with them. I got to go hang out with my friends after school as long as I had my homework done. It was always just sort of they use the reward system of you can do what you want as long as you get your stuff done on time. And so
Yeah.
like that kept my undiagnosed ADHD in check in a lot of ways, which was nice. Um, but yeah, I was just mostly bored
Yeah.
throughout all of that. But like I don't know that I finished my thought earlier with the seminary thing. I was reading like seminary theses as a high schooler. Like I remember reading, I got like access to the seminary's library because I had like these questions and these things that like other people didn't want to talk to me about or didn't have the answers for. And so I was like, I was again, like I was in it, it's not like I had one foot in, one foot out. I was putting my brain power towards like this. I haven't gotten a good enough answer, so
Mm.
it must be a problem of the people I'm asking. Let me keep getting more and more information.
Yeah.
And so, but like there were things that I talk about that biblical archaeology class. I took a lot of AP classes, which is I don't is that an Australian thing? I don't know.
Not
Their
that
high
I'm
school
aware.
class. You take classes. It's advanced placement. You take classes in high school for college credit.
Oh, right.
So I took a lot of those classes in high school, and like the biology class we took, which is a college level course, but I'm at this tiny Lutheran high school. Our teacher wrote the word evil and then did a dash and put Ushin. So we had an entire chapter, like 25% of the test is on evolution. Jesus. Um, and he would call it evolution every single time. He wrote it out with the word evil in it. He pronounced it that way. And again, I think it was like, again, I know it was like an ADHD, autistic,
Mm.
angsty teenager. Like that just turned me off to it so much. Like
Yeah.
it was like, this is too, like, stop telling me how to think. Stop, like, those things that they did to try and like keep kids away from it that did just the exact opposite. Like it was such a
Yeah.
turn off to me for like those things. It was like, I don't know, evolution seems to have like a much better track record than like this young earth creationist stuff. But I
Yeah.
was like, arguing with pastors and people about like, well, like you're wrong. There must be another answer. Like God created the earth with age. And they would be like, oh, like if you believe that, great. Like
Yeah.
I was sort of coming up with my own solutions to these problems because nobody was giving me like a good enough answer.
Yeah.
So by the time I
15-year-old
left,
me would have ate up a teacher saying evolution. She would have just like frothed over that. I would have loved it.
no, it was brutal. It was so bad. Because
Oh,
like again, in my like very black and white sort of brain, my
yeah.
brain was like, I need this for college credits.
Yeah.
Stop doing it wrong. Like,
Yeah.
and again, there are things about that. This is like the funny anecdotes. There are things that were bad about like my brain is wired for black and white thinking, and that is
Yeah.
what fundamentalist religious religions teach you. So
Yeah.
there's this part of me that's like, yeah, that was very like manipulative on like their part to prey on my brain specifically with
Yeah.
that black and white thinking. Um, but again, I wasn't aware of those things at the time.
Yeah. You mentioned, I mean, one of the biggest things and the hardest things I think for so many to deconstruct and to process and to unlearn is the fear of hell. And you're already sort of like mentioned that as a young kid. And so what was it like for you to, I'm going to ask like a dual question here because I'm also
Yeah.
sort of known for asking double-barreled questions. What was it like for you to deconstruct the concept of hell? But also, then on the flip side, what is it like for you to help other people unlearn the concept of hell?
Yeah, that's a good question. I did what people who don't have good answers do, and I was like, let me dig in and learn more about this. I remember reading, so I mentioned my parents were both teachers, both at different points in their careers, English teachers. So I grew up in like of not only like an education is very important, but like words are very important.
Yeah.
Like I grew up reading like Lord Byron and, famous
Yeah.
poetry, and like I was a weird kid. Um, but so I remember reading Dante's Inferno and being like, huh, that's pretty much our understanding of hell, but that's not in the Bible.
That's familiar.
And
Yeah.
so I like made one of those connections young just because I was like reading the classics for, I don't know, fun, question mark. Um, and so then like, I had this, it was this back and forth thing because like the Bible, the translation we used didn't say that much about hell.
Mm,
And so I was aware, I don't know, I probably chalked this up as like, this is how the world gets you, that tricky, tricky sinners out there.
mhm.
But that like there was a difference between the sort of cultural understanding of hell and what it actually was. Um, but at the same time, like I would not watch a horror film. Like anything that was about demons or demon possession was really like too freaky for me.
Yeah.
I have still to this day a pretty vivid imagination. So like as a young kid, like I was the kid who would like have a bad thought about a demon and then wake up at like 3:33 like for the next week and be like, oh no, somehow this is satanic. I don't know how, but it clearly is.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that stuff was not great for me, and it just sort of went away with like none of this is real.
Mm,
And Richard Carrier's work was really instrumental for me when I found his work. I was at that point I was working in higher ed, and doing like the very liberal Christian thing, safe space on campus, I worked with athletes at the time. I was the director of student athlete mental wellness. And so I was like pretty overtly, hey, I'm here for you, all you little closeted queer athletes who play women's softball and women's lacrosse, and those stereotypes exist for a reason. Like I was pretty out and about on a Christian campus as like, I'm safe, I
mm,
support you. Jesus has to love you. Everyone who's here is a bigot, but like I'm not. So like
yeah.
I was doing sort of that stuff. So I was like I was just like waiting. I look back and I just be like, Jeremy, just leave, just leave. Like you're ready to just leave. Um, and so when I found Richard Carrier's work, which put like so much stuff into perspective for me about how the Bible was constructed. And, I had all this, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. So I had all the systems stuff just sort of ready to apply to be like, oh yeah, like this is how an abusive parent does things. This is how an abusive partner manipulates like, this is the abuse cycle. Like I knew all that stuff professionally.
Yep.
And once I found Richard Carrier's work, which helped me let go of like the infallible nature of the Bible, which I was raised with as a fundamentalist. Once that fell, then everything else fell too. It was like this sort of load-bearing Jenga piece that was holding the whole tower up. And once it was like, you can question this because it's clearly man-made, then I was like, oh, I'm out.
Great. Good.
And I say I was out, but like, right, I went back to study religious trauma specifically to make sense of like why I
Yeah.
stayed for so long and all this other stuff. But like, it was a lot of it. It made sense to me once I like moved into that space of like, oh yeah, like obviously. And so when I work with clients around hell trauma, I don't know. I generally assume my experience is so different than other people's that I don't draw from my own experience very much. So I'm gonna do shitty therapist podcast answer and say like it depends. It depends on where my client is, how I respond.
Yeah,
That's the correct thing to do as a therapist. But truly, like I
yeah,
don't really have I've had a handful of clients who I've brought up Richard Carrier to because he's not like I would I love his work. And I've talked to him. I've gotten to meet him personally and I very much enjoy him and his work, but he's not for everyone.
yeah.
And his work is like for the nerdy kid who like had really done a deep dive or people who have probably gone to seminary, I think he's great. I
Mm,
think for somebody who like grew up in a non-denominational church and like it was like a cult of personality for a really exciting praise leader or something like that, like Richard Carrier's work is really a lot and it's kind of heavy.
yeah,
But I needed that. I had this academic background, and so I needed somebody who cited all their work and wrote it as an academic peer-reviewed paper. Like that's what I needed to be able to let it go. So I really appreciate his stuff is not as accessible as sort of like Bart Ehrman or somebody like that a lot of deconstruction folks find. But his work, like I needed the more formal scientific version of it
yeah,
from somebody who was like a PhD at Columbia, like real
yeah,
high, like somebody who in the academic world that I came from, I could be like, no, like this person knows their shit.
yeah,
So but yeah, only a handful of clients have ever found his work useful. So again, it's like one of those things where I'm aware, like that's not this. I have the big, thick,
mm,
peer-reviewed study he wrote called on the Historicity of Jesus in
yeah,
my office, and I've had one client ever open it up and look at it. um, but like I
mm,
loved it, and I have
yeah,
it in my office because like I refer to it because there's stuff in it that's like right that he's so thorough, and I really like it. I still read his blog regularly. He posts stuff pretty regularly, so like. And again, I know why people don't like necessarily dealing with him, and he's not the most popular name in deconstruction spaces, but like that's fine, you know?
yeah,
Like I needed him, and
yeah,
that worked really well for me. And yeah, so but yeah, I mean there's some books around what's the Diabolical Trinity, I think is
yeah,
a good one that covers was that Mark Karras, I want to say.
yeah, yeah,
Has some really good stuff around hell trauma. I do a lot of DBT work with folks, so there's a lot about like identifying safety and then like using those DBT skills to sort of regulate or soothe whichever we need to do.
yeah,
So I have the sports background too, I have ADHD, so I have all these different
yeah,
focuses. So like I do a lot of like skill building, what would be not like a mental wellness coach, but like a sports coach. Like I truly have that background, and so. I blend a lot of that in how I do therapy with like skill building. If I wanted you to make a free throw, we would need to practice this many times this way. If I want you to use a soothing skill, I need you to practice this many times in this way. And so that comes really naturally to me.
yeah.
And that seems to work for a lot of folks.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really practical, it's easy for people to imagine. Like a lot of people understand that if you want to build a new skill, you do need to practice, you do need to learn. You aren't
Yep.
going to know that automatically how to do the things. So I think also just like it's an easy angle for people to imagine in terms of that as
Yeah.
well. So um,
Yeah.
I do want to ask about because I can't imagine that the space you grew up in was queer affirming. So I'm curious, as a queer person, how on earth you landed as the queer safe person in a Christian campus.
Yeah. I let's see. That is a good question. Um, I didn't really like understand my own queerness for a long time because it was so wrapped up in being neurodivergent.
Yeah.
Um, and so, which like I got diagnosed with ADHD when I was 23. So like my last semester my last semester post grad, I was like weeks away from being done with school finally. That's when I got
Yeah.
diagnosed, which is a really stupid time to get
Great
diagnosed.
timing.
Yeah. Um,
Mm.
And so I had that diagnosis and I knew how to work with it. And I've worked with ADHD for a long time. But it wasn't until I left the church that I sort of like it opened up a lot of my own experience around like how out of touch I was with my body.
Yeah.
And so I had this whole like thing with sensory issues, which is where the autism comes in. Like I didn't even have access to. Like I couldn't have even explained it to a therapist to get diagnosed.
Yeah.
I really needed to like leave the church and like regulate my own system. I was doing
Hmm.
so much intellectualizing, and I have a fast brain. You know, my processing speed when it's been tested is very fast.
Yeah.
So like it was tiring and it had a cost, but I was successful at intellectualizing my way through most things. And so once I left the church and like my system could relax, it totally changed how I viewed my own neurodivergence and how I worked with other people's neurodivergence. And then I got diagnosed with autism. And so, um, but yeah, like that label of ADHD did a lot of heavy lifting for me for a long time.
Mm.
Um, whereas like, I just sort of like would argue my way out of things. Like I'm not queer. Like everybody thinks, I don't know, like nobody's so straight that they wouldn't have like a threesome with Viggo Mortensen or whatever, like Aragorn from Lord of the Rings. Like there's
Yeah.
no guy out there who wouldn't, share
Yeah.
a tent with Aragorn. Come on.
Yeah.
And like I just thought everybody was lying about it. I thought I was like, normal and straight and like everybody else was just too scared to be honest about it. And then like once I like left the church and got diagnosed, it's like, oh no, like you're just queer, obviously. Like that's that's
Yeah.
not the normal status for everyone. That's a you thing, and there's nothing wrong with it, and it's lovely and beautiful. And like you dumbass, stuff. The rest of the world hasn't been lying to you.
We
You
love the
just aren't.
self-compassion in that statement.
Yeah.
Oh.
So yeah, and I've just been like for so long, I was just attracted to everybody like all the time. And it was like sex was bad and wrong because you're not married. And so like you couldn't do anything with it. So like I think it just covered up like a lot of my own queerness. So I think that was a thing where like some part of my brain and my nervous system was ahead of where I was at intellectually with my own queerness. But I think I've always had sort of a strong um, sense of justice around like fighting for the marginalized. Like I've always rooted for the underdog. I always wanted. That's not true. For a long time, I rooted for the bad guy. I've not fit in very well in my life. But like, I related to people differently than other people, and I think I saw even as a white male who's like privileged in a lot of ways, able-bodied, good at school, all that stuff. Like I grew up poor, and I know now I'm neurodivergent, but I certainly didn't know that then.
Yeah.
Um, but like so still having a lot of privilege, and the privilege that I would argue was like forward facing, like is visual.
Mm.
I have white skin, I am able bodied, I'm not an unattractive human. Like the things that give people like those first 10 seconds of meeting you bias them to like you more. Like I have all those things.
Yeah.
So it's like um I had these things working against me, but I also had a lot of privilege. And so I think that sense of myself not fitting in and being like mad about it and having the sense of injustice or being wronged, but also like being like, yeah, but I'm privileged. So like I'm not the underdog, but like I should be on their side. I should be helping them. It's not correct. It is unjust that they are treated differently. And so I've always been working with marginalized communities. I started my career working at like homeless shelters and it's a uniquely American problem, but for people who didn't have insurance, I worked at a low fee clinic. So
Yeah.
like I worked with these marginalized people, these people who sort of, and like I love working in homeless shelters in America is the recipe for disaster, and you're sure to get burnt out because the system is so broken. But those people who are marginalized, who existed sort of outside of the norms of society, I always got along with them. Like there was that neurodivergent piece of my brain that like saw a fellow traveler and just vibed with them. And like, so there's always that sense for me. And as a coach, I've always been very, very protective of my players from bad coaches, from bad referees, from their parents being mean to them, whatever it is. It's like, hey, this like 16-year-old kid doesn't need your shit. Life is hard enough for them. Leave them alone. I need them to play volleyball. You need to stop yelling at them. So again, I think sort of that like I don't know, that protective thing. I'm sure that comes from some deep-seated version of hierarchy and misogyny in the church, but I think I've tried my best to turn that for good and not bad.
Yeah. I mean, I think some people naturally have a advocacy justice seeking part of them, I think. And I mean, I will often talk about my own experience and that, yeah, those looked different at different stages because at one
Yeah.
point they were driven by the church. But my love of justice and advocacy didn't just magically disappear when I left the church. It now just looks different. It's actually fuller than it was then.
Yeah.
But it still
Yeah.
existed. Beliefs change, values very rarely do. And so I think those
Yeah.
parts of us, exist um, all over that space, irrespective of where you land in terms of belief.
I was just gonna say, like, it's backed by a decent amount of research now that like the autistic community often
Mm.
has a strong sense of I don't want to say like morality, but like that
Yeah.
justice drive, that sense of right and wrong.
Yeah.
That's why if you're a board game nerd, like your autistic friend is lovely because they know all the rules and
Yes.
they will enforce them.
Mm.
And like, yeah, so I'm AuDHD and I think, my ADHD has been much more forward facing
Mm.
than the autistic things I struggle with. But that sense of justice has always been really strong for
Yeah.
me. And I agree. Like, yeah, when I was 17, I was like, look at me not drinking, and all these other bad Christians are out partying. Like, poof, that's
Yeah.
bad. So it has, yes, matured and looked a lot different. But like, a lot of that was doing therapy more than deconstruction. A lot of that was you get to work with so many different people from so many different, like, I don't know how you can be a therapist and your empathy can't just explode in exponential growth.
Yeah. You certainly, I don't think you're a good one anyway, if that doesn't happen. I don't think you're necessarily a
Right. Yeah.
good therapist. I think we
Please,
can
please
probably
leave.
very much know that they can do that, but it's not good. Um, I mean, you mentioned earlier that you sort of landed in an atheistic sort of pagan space.
Yeah.
What was that like for you to voice some of that to your family who was still in the Lutheran space?
Yeah. My family knows I'm not religious, and that's about the end of it.
Okay.
I have a brother who I'm very close with. My brother's 8 years older than me. He's the family member I get along with the best. He knows I'm an atheist. He knows I'm queer.
Mm.
But that's the only family member I've ever bothered to come out to on either of those things. My family knows I'm not religious, and my wife is no longer religious because when we had kids, we're like, no prayer at bedtime. They're not going to church with you. So, like,
Yeah.
setting those boundaries of if you want access to our kids, these are our rules that you need to follow.
Yeah.
And as my family is very conflict avoidant.
Mm.
Um, and so I have a sibling, I have a sister I don't talk to for, I would say, unrelated reasons. I'm sure it plays into it, but mostly unrelated reasons.
Yeah.
I have a sister who's still in the church, and my brother is not like out and about as an atheist, but is certainly not whatever version of religion. He's not practicing whatever he may personally believe still. Um, or like I guess I would say participating in an organized religion. The so yeah, I'm not real close with my dad anymore. And my mom is pretty close geographically to us and babysits our kids a lot. So we see my mom a lot, but it's really in the context of like grandma time. Like she is wonderful for my boys.
Yeah.
Um, American millennials will get this, but like having a free babysitter is a real life changer. So like,
Yeah.
as long as she was willing to respect our boundaries, we've been willing to maintain that relationship. And like, it's so weird because I think as I've matured in some of my deconstruction, like my parents are victims as much as I ever was.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's hard to sort of hold like that righteous anger at what the church does and how it harms people to these people who are like still in it, still being harmed. Like my parents were strict in the sense of what the religion taught them to be, but they were not like James Dobson fanatics or anything. His books were in our house, but
Mm.
like again, it wasn't, you know, I work with people who had much more horrific versions of that than I had. My parents are generally kind and loving people,
Yeah.
and they're misguided in some of the how and the why to
Yeah.
be loving and kind. My mom's interesting. I think she's really quite high undiagnosed anxiety, and so I wonder how much of some of that like circling stuff during the bulletin and some of her behaviors that I saw growing up was maybe not a lack of belief, but like maybe not as full-fledged hardcore into the church as I always thought she was.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I'm pretty sure some of my neurodivergence comes from my dad's side of the family. I had a grandma who's not a grandma, a great grandma who's institutionalized for a while, and like just nobody talks about that. So I'm pretty sure that's where like the neurodivergence and is on that side of the family, also based on some of my cousins.
Yeah.
But like my dad's a hard read. He and I had more of a falling out in my teenage years when I was still a Christian, just based on we're very different people.
Yeah.
He was a teacher of mine. I played baseball growing up. I had him as a coach and a teacher in the same semester, and that was like when I was 16 or 17, which is when you're pretty sick of your parents to begin with. So then he and I saw each other too much in that individuation phase that I was in. Um, I don't know that our relationship ever recovered from that. From that. So it's not animosity. My parents are still married, so I'll see him if we take the boys to my parents' house for my mom to watch them. My dad's often around, but like there's no closeness. So it's pretty comfortable just to not talk about anything.
Mm.
I'm not going out of my way to convert them to atheism as long as they are respectful of our rules with my boys, and they always have been. So,
Yeah.
which is like I'm grateful for that because that's certainly not what a lot of people experience. I get that,
Yeah, no,
but
I
I
was
definitely
actually just about to say, like, so many people, that's one of the hardest things, right? Is like, people deconstruct or they leave a church system or faith and their family don't, and yet they have to navigate relationship or boundaries and things like that.
yeah
And it's hard. But I mean, I see that online so often as well, particularly in the US with, you know, people talking about like their MAGA families and things like that and
hmm
having to navigate boundaries. And so it's hard, right?
yeah it's I think my parents knew me well enough to know like there would be no changing that boundary.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how like again like they're lovely upstanding people or it's like based on respect or just like if we mess with this, he will not let us see those boys.
Yeah.
And so I think it was a very like I didn't have to fight the boundary. It was like set and it was firm right away.
Yeah.
And some of that's like because I know how to set a boundary because I teach other people how to do boundaries all the time.
Yeah.
Like I'm not coming at it as like, look at me, I get it all right, and my family's awesome. I think it was like, right, I have done this work for a long time. My wife and I were married for 6 or 7 years before we had kids. So like, and that was because that's how I wanted to do it as a marriage therapist. Like I was like, we're not having kids right away, even though we did the very Christian thing and got married young. We were like, let's just be married for a while and not have kids. And so like it was like 30, 31 when we had our first kid. So it was like setting some of those boundaries was I knew what I was doing. I knew how to set a boundary, and my parents knew me well enough to know like that wasn't a thing to test.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I typically will ask this question, but I'm going to ask it in a bit of a different way, which is like, as someone who has intellectualized so much of their deconstruction, how does the concept of spirituality land for you now? What is that space like?
Yeah, I don't know. I still intellectualize it a lot.
Yeah.
No, I hold a lot of like reverence and space for nature, and
Yeah.
I feel best. I feel best participating in community in nature.
Mm.
I can tell you that's because I get a lot of dopamine from being in nature.
Yeah.
Like I can still do like, and let me explain why. It's not spirituality, it's science.
Yes.
No, I got my certification a few years ago to work with to guide entheogenic experiences for folks, psychedelics.
Yeah.
Even in that space, I see some people who are a little too wooey for my taste, and I'm like, it's not this magical thing. You're on a drug,
Yeah.
and it's a thing that's changing your brain chemistry, and that changes your experience. It's not more than that. Stop expanding it to be God or the source or whatever. Like
Mhm.
it's not telling you anything any more than your doctor putting you under anesthesia is telling you. Like it's the same thing. It's a drug that's not natural to your brain, and your brain is responding accordingly. Like, so I'm not like a, I don't know, spiritual. I would describe it as like my hackles get raised around it. I'm
Yeah.
still prickly around the concept of it because I think more than my own personal experience, because I see still on a regular basis how many people get harmed
Oh,
by it.
yeah.
As my working with religious trauma and seeing it, like that sense of justice and like this thing is bad and wrong and we should stop letting people do it is like right there for me.
Yeah.
And that's I would lean towards more based on my clients' experiences than my own.
Mm.
I like psychedelic work. I like people who do that stuff. I like a lot of the pagan stuff that I've been involved in, and like I can explain how and why it works in the human psyche without going into a supernatural explanation. And that's, I also hold science tentatively in the sense that, like, obviously we don't understand everything and we don't have a good scientific explanation for everything. I put that mostly on, like, there is a good explanation, we just don't have it yet,
Yeah.
more than I land on supernatural. But yeah, like, I think it is magical to have a really good connection with someone. I think having a fantastic conversation with another human being is like this little m magic.
Mhm.
Like I think there are things that are exceedingly wonderful and beautiful and make life worth living without needing to like default to a supernatural. I will, like, we rescued a praying mantis recently,
Oh.
and it has like been amazing, and I've gotten so much joy from watching my children watch it eat, from me watching it eat, from having to catch it
Yeah.
food, and like all this stuff. And like, again, I'm very ADHD. My 7-year-old is too. Like, right, it's a brand new thing that's really exciting in our house. We're of course
New
just
and
like
shiny.
feasting on dopamine,
Yeah.
and it's lovely. But like, again, it's like this planet Earth episode in this aquarium every time we feed it, and it's so cool and it's so interesting, and like, right, and my 7-year-old named it, and then he was like, well, now we got to keep it because we named it. And so like, it's just like, yeah, I as self-aware mammals, that doesn't mean like life has to suck and be this nihilistic horror show. Like, there's love and beauty and joy. So I don't know. That's a really long, terrible definition of spirituality. But like, I think there are things that are beautiful and magical without needing to be supernatural.
Yeah, and well, actually, before I ask this question, I need to know the praying mantis's name now.
Its name is Razor.
Oh,
I think he named it Razor because it's got the sharp
yes.
for, I don't know, they're not claws. I know a lot of things about mantises that you call them mantids. See, like that's
Um,
it's been a hyper focus of mine. I don't know what their forelimbs are referred to, but like it's so like they get spikier when they see prey. Like it's so cool to
oh,
watch their body adjust to this like stimuli. It's so
that's cool.
fascinating.
That
And
is
you can
cool.
train them. She recognizes, I don't know that she recognizes my voice yet, but you can train them to recognize voices so that like they know they're going to get fed because they recognize that voice. So
Wow.
my wife doesn't like bugs, so we don't
Oh,
take her out. You can like hold them and let them move around. They do have wings, so they can
yeah.
fly. So we
Yeah.
usually keep her in her aquarium. But yeah, it's like, it's stuff like that where it's like, man, you can be like really down about the state of the world, but especially the
Mm.
United States.
Yeah.
Um, and then like something like that comes along and it's like so joyous and wonderful. So
Yeah. I love that. And it's like the the question that I was about to say or sort of just like mention was it is such a nuanced space to actually just realize that religion and spirituality don't own the monopoly on things like love and joy and peace and harmony and all of those sorts of things. And
yeah,
that is both a really, for a lot of people, can be a really hard space to land in because that's all that's ever been associated with. But you sort of were like, it's not the best definition of spirituality, but like, getting to a space where like those things are inherently spiritual within, they just don't have an external spirituality or a divine nature or something, bigger and
Yeah.
grander than yourself.
Yeah. I remember a therapy mentor of mine um, was talking at a conference, and they sort of offhandedly referred to like a good an intellectually stimulating conversation as being a spiritual experience.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's always like, yes, I would much rather, 1,000% would rather have a intellectually stimulating conversation than go to church.
Yeah.
And it was
Totally
like,
agree.
she didn't know I was deconstructing, or that
Yeah.
wasn't really the frame of reference for anybody but me. But like, she just sort of had that throwaway line, and it like hit me of like, oh yeah,
Hmm.
like I do have a lot of data on this stuff already. I've just never had
Yeah.
the framework to put around it.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, when I'm talking with clients, I will go like eating a good meal at a new restaurant can feel spiritual. Like, playing
Yeah,
with your dog can feel spiritual. Like
yeah,
I'm going to Lady Gaga in like 6 weeks, and I guarantee that will feel spiritual to me. Like it's all
yeah. And
those things.
it gets posted online pretty regularly, but there's a old, I think it's a Tumblr post or something, but it's like, I used to think that praise band was me
Yeah.
connecting with the spirit, but then I had the same experience at a One Direction concert, and I realized they just like music. And it's like,
Yes. Yeah. Just
yeah,
a fan of live
that's why
music. Yeah.
that's why church has music to elicit that
Yes.
response. That's why we do the 24-hour stay awake marathons
Mm.
to elicit a response. Like, religion didn't create any of this stuff. Religion is
Oh,
taking advantage of the way that our brains are wired.
yeah, absolutely.
And I come from a social constructionist background around therapy. So,
Mm.
the postmodern therapy is narrative therapy and
Mm.
solution focused. But when I am forced to, I say I'm a collaborative language therapist, which is probably the nerdiest and least well known of the postmodern therapies. But it's so much about language, and it's about how meaning making is like this ongoing co-creative process. And like, I always thought that was so cool because I'm such like a nerd about words. And
Mm.
so that idea that like we can change our meaning in
Mm.
every single conversation we have, we can make new meanings, we can build new things just by conversing together. Like, there's a like cynical part of me that's like, that's very hippie nonsense, and then there's a part of me that's like, that's so lovely and
Yeah.
like that's reassuring in a lot of ways for me. And so I think when I left religion, like, I had this philosophy that was really easy around like, meaning making is arbitrary, and that doesn't mean it's meaningless. That's very freeing that it's arbitrary. It means that we get to participate in the process instead of having it done for us. And I love that, and I still love doing this work with people because I get to see that happen. Like, I get to witness other people's journeys around like their own meaning making and finding meaning and co-creating it in an intentional way, and how much better that feels than having it done for you or having it prescribed to you is like, yeah, it's so cool.
Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah. And that is a nice trend. I love when transitions happen naturally, which is a nice transition to what I usually finish these episodes with, which is some encouragement for people because everybody is at different stages of where they're at processing this stuff and deconstructing and going through either leaving or getting kicked out of spaces and things like that. But I usually ask just a very broad, what would you say to someone who is fresh in this space, fresh in their deconstruction, and there
Yeah.
is lots of question marks?
Yeah, I think, you know, one of the things I talk about a lot is like, family is who treats us how we want to be treated.
Yeah,
Um,
that sounds almost biblical, Jeremy.
I know.
It
Should
sounds
write a book
it
someday.
sounds very familiar.
My look is wasted in the podcast because
It
I definitely
really
look like
is.
what Christian nationalists wish Jesus looked like.
Uh,
Um, 6'3", beautiful long hair, big
Yeah.
beard, blue eyes. I'm white Jesus. Um, the 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 sense of connection most people have to organized religion is a sense of community, and I get that. Like that's a very powerful driver of human need, and like a lot of it is coercive or manipulative. It's not healthy. It's not what we describe as chosen family. Um, it's closer to what we get from our family of origins. It's closer to what our biological family often is. It's a sense of obligation, or it's um, a, a transactional relationship instead of being one that is like mutually loving and respectful. And so I think finding your family, finding chosen family, building community that is actual unconditional love, not unconditional love with a lot of fine print.
Yeah.
Um, and for people who can access their bodies, like listen to your body. For my neurodivergent people out there who are like, the fuck is he talking about with accessing their body? Like,
Yeah.
it's read the books, listen to the podcasts, do the intellectual thing. But yeah, I think most people are like dumb idiots in a lot of ways, and most of us carry a lot of wonderful wisdom at the same time. And so, we have to hold both those truths at the same time of having community who can call us out when we need to, but like being able to find things on our own, things that vibe with us, things that feel good authentically. Like your body is giving you feedback in real time. It's nice to pay attention to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I mean, one of the most beautiful parts that I love about the podcast is having such a diversity of people in terms of like experience and perception and, faith systems and all of that. But I think that there will be a subsect of people who will really appreciate the intellectual nature of your deconstruction process, who will listen to other episodes and go, I don't get that. That doesn't make sense to
Yeah.
me. Who will listen to this episode and go, oh, that's because that makes sense for me. And I love that. I love
Yeah.
that.
If, for anybody, the late diagnosed AuDHD crowd who's
Yeah.
tuning in, like I put out a lot of content, not just on religious trauma, but on mental health in general. So
Yeah.
if you want more from this perspective,
Yes.
I'm not hard to find on the internet.
Yes, and I will be popping all of the links in the show notes anyway for people to be able to
Yeah.
find you. But yeah, again, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Beyond the Surface. I hope you found today's conversation as insightful and inspiring as I did. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who might benefit from these stories. Stay connected with us on social media for updates and more content. I love connecting with all of you. Remember, no matter where you are in your journey, you're not alone. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep moving forward. Take care.